Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're doing a Q&A. We collected some questions mostly from our course group members, but also a few from our Instagram DMs recently. I think we've got about 20 questions that we're going to go through, and then at the end, if we have time, we'll go through some questions that you guys have that are watching live as well. Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll get right into the questions.
All right. Hey, for those that may not know us, we are Whitney and Jared Kazaza. We're both traveling doctors of physical therapy. We are the faces behind Travel Therapy Mentor. A lot of you guys may follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Maybe listen on our podcast. You might be on our email list as well. We have been traveling physical therapists for about 9 years. So we started as new grads in 2015. And we started our first blog in 2016, Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist, and then we started Travel Therapy Mentor in 2018. So we've been putting out content in the travel therapy space for many years now, and consistently making videos and podcasts for the last 5 years. So we have a lot of travel therapy educational content. If you are newer to our page, we encourage you to go back and listen to some of our older stuff. Check out the articles and resources that we have on our website at traveltherapymentor.com. We do also have a travel therapy course. As Jared mentioned, the primary focus for tonight's Q&A was to spend some time addressing questions that we got from our course group members and go through some specific scenarios that they're encountering right now. A lot of them are either currently on contract or might be getting ready to start travel therapy for the first time. But we do have a couple other questions that we got from DMs. And if you are watching live, we would love if you would just say hi in the comments, and then let us know if you have any specific questions, and we'll see if we'll have time to get to those at the end as well. Jared's going to share our video in a couple of groups so that more people can join on with us live tonight on Facebook. We are live on both Facebook and Instagram. And then shout out to those of you that will listen later on the replay on our YouTube channel and our podcast. We appreciate you guys. I see Joanne is tuning in. Hi, Joanne. I know Joanne is in our course group, and she is getting ready to start travel here very soon, and we got a couple of questions from Joanne, and then there's a lot of you guys that are on live on Instagram as well. So hey guys, thanks for tuning in. All right, so we will start diving into questions. We have all kinds of different questions tonight. A lot of them are travel therapy specific. Some of them are more like adjacent to travel therapy. Like we got some questions about student loans and things like that. CEUs, a lot of people are focused on CEUs this time of year, so we'll dive into that just a little bit. Definitely a lot of questions about tax homes and taxes that we're going to cover. That tends to be a pretty typical thing that a lot of people are curious about and have questions about our tax homes and tax questions as it relates to being a travel therapist. So we'll definitely cover some of those. And then keep in mind, again, if you are newer to our page, this Q&A style, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about each question. But probably somewhere in the past, we've done a whole video or a whole article on these topics. So we could probably spend an hour talking about each individual topic here. So we'll just kind of briefly dive into it tonight for the purpose of the Q&A. Hey Juan, good to see you as well. Hi Madison. Again, if you're watching live, we would just love if you'd say hi in the comments, give us a little wave. Let us know who you are. Are you a current traveler? Are you a student who's thinking about traveling, or a clinician who's thinking about traveling? We'd love to hear from you. All right, so we'll dive into our questions for tonight. So the first question is in regard to how to navigate working with multiple recruiters. And for many of you, if you've listened to some of our stuff in the past, we do encourage you to work with multiple recruiters. We have always worked with more than one recruiter. It really opens up more opportunities for you to be able to compare jobs, be able to compare benefits. Sometimes you really limit yourself when you only work with one recruiter. But with that said, a lot of people end up finding after they talk to a few that they really like one recruiter the best, and they end up taking most of their contracts with them, and that is totally fine. We're all about building relationships with the recruiters, and if you have a good, consistent working relationship with them, that's a great thing to do, but it is good just to keep your options open and to consider this. So this specific question from someone in our course group, she says, I have questions regarding the appropriate way to speak with recruiters if you decide to not go with them for a contract. For example, I had reached out to 2 different recruiters regarding different contracts, but my current contract ended up offering to extend me. She said, I haven't accepted the offer yet, but I plan to. What's the best practice for communicating with the other recruiter that I plan to extend my current contract and I'm going to stay with the other recruiter? Both of them are wonderful recruiters. It just worked out better for me to extend, but the other recruiter did go out of their way to reach out to facilities for me regarding contracts prior to me knowing about this extension. So what should I do?
Yeah. Starting out in the travel therapy world, it can be a little uncomfortable because you feel like, oh, this person's put in so much effort for me and I'm not going to take this job with them, and you feel bad. But the more you travel, the more you realize that that's just part of the job. Recruiters are trying to pitch jobs to people, trying to get you to take jobs. They're going to put in a lot of effort sometimes and not land the contract, and they're going to put in very little effort sometimes and have someone go right into a job. So it's not a big deal at all. You'd basically just thank them for their time, say, I think it's going to work out best for me if I extend this contract, but I will definitely be in contact on the next job search and hopefully work with you in the future. And any good recruiter will completely understand that.
Yeah, it's all about just being transparent, being professional with them. You don't want them to be shady toward you, so you don't want to be shady toward them. You want to definitely let them know you appreciate their time, you appreciate their effort. And even if, say, the circumstance was different and you actually didn't want to work with them in the future, that's okay too. You would just say, I really appreciate your help, but I'm all set now, and I actually have another recruiter I'm going to move forward working with. I wish you the best. But as long as you're transparent and you're professional about it, it's going to be okay. They understand. And again, most of them understand that you are working with multiple recruiters. So that's fine as long as you're just professional about it. But hopefully in this case, if you like both recruiters, you can let them know hey, I'm going to go ahead and extend this one contract, but I'd love to get back in touch with you in a couple months when I'm ready to look for my next one.
Yeah, you should never take a job that is a worse situation for you or do something that is not beneficial to your own situation just to not feel bad about a situation with a recruiter. So they understand it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and to go a little, further into this, we often get questions about just how do you navigate the situation back before this point where you've made a decision. You do want to let them know up front that you are talking to multiple recruiters. It's better to let them know up front than to tell them later and have them be disappointed. Just say, hey, I just want to let you know I am being submitted to a couple different jobs by different people. I'm going to try to find the contract that's the best fit for me, and that way they're just aware. So they're not completely blindsided by it. And then another thing that goes into that is you always want to make sure that you're not being submitted to the same jobs by more than one recruiter. So if you are looking at a very specific city and setting, and if this one says I have a San Diego outpatient and this one says I also have a San Diego outpatient, you need to ask what the name of the facility is so you make sure you don't get double submitted to the same job. But again, transparency and being open about it and just being professional is the best way to handle that.
Okay, the next question is when to start talking to recruiters. I'm graduating in December, planning to take my boards in January, but might push it to April. Would you recommend starting to talk with recruiters now before taking my exam or waiting? This is, in our opinion, especially if you don't plan on traveling until potentially after April, waiting to talk to recruiters is fine. Probably no more than 3 months in advance. You're not really benefiting yourself much earlier than that. You want to give yourself 2 or 3 months at least to get things filled out, to talk to the recruiters, build a relationship, those types of things. But more than 3 months, there's really no point because there's not a lot they're going to be able to do for you that far ahead of time. There's not going to be jobs open. There's not going to be, once you fill out the paperwork and stuff, there's not really a lot that you can do. So if you don't plan on traveling until potentially April or May, wait for a few months. If you're going to take boards in January and travel in February, then you might be coming up on the time that you'd want to start contacting recruiters, but just determine when exactly it is that you want to start traveling, and then about 10 to 12 weeks before that is when you want to start reaching out to them.
And I would say specifically with this exact timeline, when it comes to answering this person's particular situation, the other thing to consider right now at this time of year is that there is sometimes this lull at the end of December and beginning of January around the holidays where a lot of staff is out, the recruiters are out, the people who might be interviewing you for jobs are out. And so I don't think it really hurts you to just go ahead and wait until that second week of January to go ahead and initiate this process, because there's probably not a whole lot they can get done for you right now during this holiday time period, especially if you don't think you're going to be traveling until February, March, April. But again, I think it's best if you just kind of go ahead and make up your mind when are you going to take boards and then judge your timeline based on that. The other thing to say in regards to this as it pertains to new grads, there are some recruiters that will submit you to jobs prior to you passing your board exam, but there are some recruiters that prefer not to do that. They want to wait until after you take your boards because you could not pass on the first time, and then that would put you in a tricky situation if you had already accepted a job. because then you would have to back out of the job. But again, you just kind of want to talk to the individual recruiter. It might also depend on the facility. Some facilities are willing to just go ahead and interview you and take that risk. But this is just a conversation you'd be willing to have with the recruiters.
Yep. Okay, the next question is about travel reimbursement. I'm thinking about starting travel in several months, maybe headed west to California from Virginia. Does the travel company I decide to go with pay expenses or give reimbursement of the cross-country trip, or is that all on the travel therapist? If on the therapist, any tips to keep expenses low? So it's kind of a combination of the two. Whatever travel company you take the contract with, you can pretty much always negotiate some sort of travel reimbursement for that trip. Normally it's mileage based, and normally there's a cap on how much they'll pay, depending on the company. It could be somewhere between like 400, probably some companies, the maximum is like 400, to some companies might pay 600 or maybe even more, just depending. A long trip like that, obviously the expenses are going to be higher, but yeah, normally it's on a mileage basis, like something like a half a cent per mile with some sort of maximum amount that they'll pay. The reason that there's a maximum, because obviously there's no maximum to how much you would spend, is because if they pay you a ton up front and then your contract either gets canceled because the facility doesn't need you, or you decide to cancel your contract early, well, now they're on the hook for that money they already paid out. So a lot of companies don't want to invest a lot of money before you ever start the contract in case something happens and it doesn't work out. So yes, they partially will cover it, but on a trip like that, if it's multiple days, it might not cover all of your expenses, but at least some of them.
Yeah, and so in regards to how to keep expenses low, that's definitely a long road trip. We always try, just general like financial hacking. If you have an opportunity to fill up using fuel points, if you have an opportunity to use, a cashback credit card where you can try to, redeem some points toward your expenses going across the country. We like to stay in Airbnbs to cut on costs during cross-country road trips.
Or if you can use hotel nights from credit cards. We've had tons of luck with Hyatts all across the country. Often Hyatts have places you can stay for 5,000 to 8,000 points, and you sign up for a new Hyatt credit card, you can get 40 to 50,000 points depending on the time, usually 30, 40, 50,000. So you can at least get a few nights free with various credit cards. So we've done a combination of all of those things, renting a room in Airbnbs or getting free hotel nights or whatever to save money on our cross-country road trips.
Yeah, and you can also, depending on if you have any family or friends that you can kind of like weave into your cross-country road trip, you might have somebody you can stay with along the way. So definitely a lot of things that you could do to try to cut on costs for a cross-country road trip. But it's a great adventure. It's so amazing. The first time we ever drove across the country, it was just phenomenal. I honestly, people were always talking about like, oh, it's so boring to drive through Kansas. You get to Kansas and it's just flat. And I thought Kansas was beautiful because I'd never seen Kansas before. And I was like, this is awesome. Now I could see if you go back and forth a lot through Kansas, it's like, yeah, it is kind of flat. But so I think it'll be an amazing trip, and hopefully you can get most of that reimbursed from the travel company.
One thing I would recommend though is, if at all possible, if it's not like money is extremely tight and you don't have any extra money, that's one thing. But if you do, take a couple extra days and go slower and enjoy it versus like just trying to get there as fast as you possibly can, because yeah, cross-country road trips are really cool if you take time and stop at some cool places along the way.
Nick said, I believe probably in regard to Kansas, he said, rude, we have the best sunsets. No, honestly, we saw some really good sunsets, and we saw some gorgeous sunflowers. There were so many sunflowers in Kansas. Yeah, I just think it's amazing to have the opportunity to drive across our country, because you'll see it change so much from the East Coast to the West Coast. So
it was that high point of Kansas we went to, right, with all the sunflowers?
Yeah, but they were along the road other places. Yeah. All right, so we have another question regarding reimbursements on a contract. And this question was in regards to how and when to negotiate the reimbursements when you're trying to get them put into your paycheck, your pay package. So the when is definitely in the beginning when you're negotiating your pay package and you're signing your contract. So you want to negotiate all these reimbursements up front and get it worked into your pay package. The how, it kind of depends. Different companies do it different ways. So some companies will just kind of automatically be like, oh, we automatically include a license reimbursement if you need that. We automatically include
travel reimbursement.
The travel reimbursement, that sort of thing. But there are some that'll be like, no, if you need that, it's gonna affect your weekly pay. So you definitely want to ask about that stuff up front and ask if it's going to change how your pay package looks or not.
And we kind of covered this last week, but some travelers will fall into the trap of, oh, this company doesn't give me a reimbursement, or it affects my pay package if they give me a reimbursement for a license or travel. I don't want to work with them. What you have to remember is that the companies that it does impact your pay package, they're just not setting money aside to give you for those things. So if you work with a company and it's like, okay, they quote you a pay package and then it's like, oh, but I also need a license. Oh, I also need travel reimbursement. And they're like, okay, great. It's not going to affect your pay. All that means is that before they ever negotiate with you, they're just keeping a little bit aside. That's their company policy, to keep an extra 1% maybe of the bill rate aside to cover those types of things. The other company where they're having to account for that on the back end, they just didn't do that. They're just giving you the full amount up front. If you need more taken out of your pay package, then they take it out of your individual pay package instead of keeping 1% or so aside for reimbursements for everyone. So it's not a difference of like one company's good, one company's bad. It's a difference of basically just how they account for it on the front end or on the back end.
Yep. So definitely important to keep in mind there. And again, I can't remember if that specific question was from one of our course group members or not, but I know we do go a lot into detail on our course about how all that works. So for those of you that are in our course or are thinking about taking our course, once you get a chance to go through the whole thing, we talk a lot about these nuanced topics to help you better understand the industry as a whole and understand negotiating.
Yep.
All right, the next question we got is it possible to get a PRN job while you're on a travel therapy assignment at your travel therapy location? And if so, would that affect your tax home?
Yes, it's possible to get PRN jobs. We've done it in the past. It can be hard, though, to find them. You have to find a facility or something that's usually fairly really in need of someone, because a lot of places don't want to go through the hassle of onboarding, hiring for someone that's part-time and temporary, but there are places that will do it if they really need somebody. I did PRN at I think a couple skilled nursing places because they just really needed a therapist. They were willing to give me 5 or 6 hours a week, and I was fine with that. No, it does not affect your tax home as long as it's also temporary. So I guess I want to qualify that. Based on the accountants that we've talked to, they say that as long as your PRN job, your temporary employment ends when the contract employment ends, then that was obviously also a temporary job. It doesn't affect your tax home. It's not like you moved there. So with that caveat, as long as you're not like taking a travel contract, taking a PRN job, and then you just move to that location, that would change things. But if it's temporary, just like your travel assignment, then no big deal there at all.
Yep. All right, the next question we got is regarding traveling with a spouse who's not in healthcare. So, of course, there's a lot of you out there that might be like Jared and I, and you're both in healthcare, and it can be really helpful if you can both take travel therapy jobs. But there are so many others out there that have spouses that could maybe potentially come along with them depending on their circumstance. Again, we've done some videos and some articles diving deep into this topic. But the question was, actually, I know this was from Joanne, and she was kind of asking, she also wanted to get some input from folks besides us, so some other folks in our course group, some other folks in the audience. So if anybody has any feedback about this too, does your non-healthcare spouse come with you while you're traveling, or do they stay back home? And how would your choice here affect your relationship?
Yeah, this is definitely one of those questions that's not one size fits all. We've seen both ways. There are, especially in the nursing world, obviously there's a lot more travel nurses than there will ever be travel therapists. And so if you go in like some of the nursing forums or nursing groups, you'll see every possible situation you can imagine with a non-healthcare working spouse, where sometimes they travel with them, sometimes they take contracts 2 hours from home and they're just doing commuting for 4 or 5 days a week, and then they're going back home for 2 days to spend time with them. And sometimes they're going across the country for 3 months and being away, and they just do long distance during that time. So it really depends. There's definitely no one size fits all for all relationships. Everybody's different. Some people really like the fact, as just one example of this, that say you go work a 3-month contract, you make way more than you would at home, you're away from your spouse or your partner or whatever for that 3-month period, but then maybe you can take a month off and spend with them completely for a month, and you have way more quality time during that time where you're not stressed working versus, you know, if you were at home working 40 hours a week consistently. So a variety of different ways to handle it, but we definitely know people that have done both, and it doesn't seem to really be one or the other is more common.
I think there's just so many variables, and it would really depend on you and your relationship. If you're comfortable leaving for a period of time and being apart and just visiting sometimes, how far away is the contract? As Jared said, I think it makes a big difference too. Like if you're going all the way across the country and you're really probably not going to be able to see them but maybe 1 or 2 visits during that 3 months, versus if you're just a driving distance away and you guys could still see each other on weekends. And I know you also mentioned your working spouse, so your spouse who still has a job. I think it would also depend, does your spouse have a job that that could go on the road? Could they go remote, or do they have a job that they don't need to keep that job, but they could pick up other jobs? We've heard of people taking their spouse along and they just kind of pick up random work when they're in the area because they don't necessarily have a set career they need to be committed to. So there's just a lot of variables there, and I think it's something you really have to work out with your individual scenario.
Yep.
So,
Another question we got recently was about traveling with school-aged kids. So I think it was probably a month ago, we did a video about traveling with kids because Whitney's pregnant, due in a couple weeks. So we've thought a lot about this, but this was specifically about traveling with school-aged kids, and is it possible, and how to make it work.
yeah, and so this is a little more tricky. We've had a couple of guest posts on our blog from different families who did different things. I would say the majority of the people that we've talked to that travel with kids are typically younger than school age. They're typically babies to 5 years old, so that school is not a factor. But we have heard of people traveling with school age children in the past. Usually it makes the most sense to homeschool. Now there are some people that say if they are a pediatric therapist themselves and they choose to take like a 9-month, 10-month school contract in one area, so then they're basically there for the whole school year, well then they can also enroll their school-age child in the school for that year. But you really would have to take into account, is this the best thing for your family, for your child, to be able to do that? You know, do you want them moving every school year? Maybe that might be okay with you, maybe it might not be. Probably it seems like homeschooling would be the best option if you have one spouse that could stay home and homeschool while the other spouse is the healthcare worker and goes and takes a contract. That's probably the best way to make it work, but it's definitely a lot trickier, we think, than traveling with young children and babies.
And this, of course, also depends on the age of the kids and how independent they are, because I remember several years ago there was a traveler that we talked to online that had a I think it was like 15, maybe 16-year-old daughter that homeschooled, that she could just do homeschooling at home on her own and it was not a big deal. So obviously that situation is going to be very different than, say, a elementary school kid that cannot do things on their own. They need some supervision while they're doing homeschooling activities. So a lot of variables. It is definitely more common to homeschool, I think. I don't really know of anybody that we've talked to that actually moves their kids every time they move, because that would be pretty hard. So normally homeschooling, and normally one spouse stays at home. If not, it definitely makes things more complicated.
I would say when it comes to traveling with spouses, kids, families, dogs, all these things, you can probably find someone out there who's done it. Done it one way, done it the other way. If you really want to make it work, you can probably make it work. But you just kind of really have to look into the logistics, what makes sense for you and your family and your partner, and so forth and so on. But yeah, you can probably find examples of just any type of scenario.
All right, next question is about contract cancellations. Have you guys ever had to cancel a contract before starting? Any repercussions other than the recruiter and the job being annoyed with you?
Yeah, so good question here. We've never canceled a contract when we had agreed to it, either verbally agreed to it or actually signed the contract already before starting. We've never canceled a contract. I think the only time we ever canceled a contract was toward the end of a contract when we had agreed to an extension and then we changed our mind and we're like, never mind, we're not going to do the extension. That was the only time we've ever canceled a contract before. And
it was sort of a mutual thing where they wanted wasn't going to work for us, and so it wasn't going to work for them. So
yeah. So in general, we encourage you not to take canceling contracts lightly, whether it's before it starts, during it, otherwise. It's really the best practice and the most professional thing that if you have agreed to a contract that you stick to it, unless there are extenuating circumstances. If you have some type of family emergency or some major change that has occurred, there might be circumstances where it's like, okay, I need to cancel. So this is kind of specific to a pre-contract start. I've also talked to some people where it was like, we've heard questions where it was like, okay, I thought it was going to be a good fit, but now that I'm trying to find housing in the area and I'm reading more about the area, I'm realizing that there's no good housing options. It doesn't seem like a safe area. If you have a legitimate reason, I would talk it over with your recruiter, let them know your concerns, see if they can help you. But most of the time, if you have a very legitimate reason, like suddenly something has changed, I had a family emergency, they're going to understand. But if you just kind of decided, nah, I found something better, that's not a really good reason to cancel the contract. Are there any repercussions? There's probably not going to be any legal repercussions if you do cancel for some reason that's not very good. but you probably are going to burn the bridge with both the recruiter, the staffing company, and the facility. They are not going to be happy about it, and they probably won't work with you in the future.
Yeah.
All right, so we got a couple people commenting. Again, we have probably like 5 or 10 more questions that we received in advance, but if you guys do want to ask some questions in the comments, if you're watching live, we'll see if we have time to get to them at the end.
Yeah. I guess just one more thing to add to the contract cancellations. Repercussions, yeah, if it's a legit reason, don't worry too much about it. You tell the recruiter, the facility, I mean, everyone knows that stuff happens in life. Say like it's the death of a parent or something really bad, of course they're going to understand. The only time that you're ever going to have any issue is if it's just, I decided not to take it, then of course they're going to be upset about that, just like you would be upset if the facility canceled your contract. So yeah, you're definitely going to burn bridges in that situation, but if it's a legit reason, don't worry about it.
Yep. All right, the next question is about traveling as a new grad. I'm interested in travel therapy when I graduate. I was wondering your opinion on how reliable travel therapy is as a new grad. I've only seen a few new grad specific jobs on your hot jobs list. And I believe that the person who asked this was an occupational therapist. So a couple things to say here. First of all, when it comes to our hot jobs list, we just get a very small selection of some hot jobs each week. So our hot jobs list is not a comprehensive list of all jobs that are out there. It is a good way to just kind of gauge the market and see a handful of jobs. But what we do for our hot jobs list every week is we ask all the different recruiters. We work with recruiters at about a dozen different companies. We ask them to send us anywhere from about 5 to 20 of just their top jobs for that week. So it's just a small sample. The second thing to note there is just because a job doesn't have listed in the notes that it's new grad friendly doesn't mean it may or may not be new grad friendly. Yep. They just may not have chosen to specify that. You quite often find out a lot more about the jobs once you actually get a chance to interview with the job or dig into it a little bit deeper. So don't worry about whether it's our job list or a different job list. What's on the job list may not be the complete information that's available.
Yeah, often a company will often a job will not advertise as new grad friendly, but almost every job will consider a new grad in the right circumstances. And those circumstances might be that you have strong clinicals in that setting, that you're competent, you feel good about it, you interview with them and they feel good about you. Then very often these places that normally wouldn't consider a new grad, once they talk to you, then they will. So very rarely do jobs actually advertise new grad friendly unless they're jobs that they know is going to be hard to fill. So say a location that's not very desirable or something like that, they might say new grad friendly because they know they probably won't get a lot of applicants. So just because it doesn't say that doesn't mean it's not new grad friendly. It just means that they didn't go all their way to advertise it.
Something else to consider too is whether it says new grad friendly, you have to also weigh, does that mean just that they'll accept new grads or that it's actually a good fit for a new grad?
Yeah.
So just because they're saying yeah, we'll take a new grad doesn't mean that it's always new grad friendly. It may not be a good fit. It's really up to you actually to determine if you think that job is new grad friendly, and that happens during the interview when you're going to ask things about the caseload, about the productivity demands, who else is on staff. So it's really up to you to determine if that's a good fit for you. And so this is where we encourage you to not just rely on job lists. We think it's best to work, especially for new grads, but for anybody, work one-on-one with a recruiter to help you identify jobs that might be a good fit. And some really good recruiters that work great with new grads are better at knowing that they've had a facility where they had a new grad before, and they could kind of point you in the direction of those of yeah, I think this would actually be a good fit for you because I had a new grad there before. They said it was great. Would you be interested in this job? So we think overall it's best to be in touch with a few different recruiters. If you are interested in getting in touch with some recruiters that we recommend, you can fill out our recruiter recommendation form on our website at traveltherapymentor.com/recruiters, and we can take a look at your specific scenario, whether you're a new grad or otherwise, and point you in the direction of good recruiters who can handpick and help you with your specific job search.
That was a really good point, actually. To add to that, some of the jobs that say new grad friendly are not good jobs at all. And maybe that's why they're saying they're new grad friendly, is because they're trying to attract someone that doesn't know better. So be careful with those jobs specifically. Just because it says new grad friendly does not mean, that just means that they will accept a new grad. It doesn't mean that it's a good job for a new grad. So yeah, it is a lot better to have a relationship with a recruiter that's placed people all over the country, and they'll kind of have an idea, usually, if this is a facility that uses a lot of travelers, whether it's a good place to send you or not.
Yeah. And the other part of that question is how reliable is travel therapy, or how good of a fit is it for a new grad? We've addressed this dozens of times. We've done tons of videos and articles about whether or not it's a good fit to travel as a new grad. It really just depends on you as an individual. In terms of like how reliable it is, like will you be able to find back-to-back contracts? That also depends a little bit on your discipline. So for like physical therapists right now, there's tons of jobs available. So you can definitely find back-to-back jobs, very reliable job market for a physical therapist. OT is pretty solid, but not quite as good as PT. So depending on how picky you are, maybe just a little bit harder to find consistent work. But usually once you get 1 or 2 contracts under your belt, you're not really even considered a new grad anymore. So that wouldn't be so much of a concern.
Yep.
All right. And I see we're getting a couple of questions in the comments. So again, if you guys are liking this video, if you would just hit the thumbs up button, feel free to leave some questions in the comments and we'll see if we have time for those at the end. Okay, so we got some questions about CEUs. This is good timing because we're actually running a special right now with MedBridge. If you sign up with our MedBridge code, you can, which is TTM, you can get 40% off your subscription. And then through tomorrow, Monday the 14th, you'll also get entered to win our giveaway where we're giving away an additional 12 months free. So basically you buy the subscription for 12 months and if you win the giveaway, then they would extend it an additional 12 months. So you basically get 2 years for the price of 1 year. So this question is about renewing licenses. They had 2 different states to renew. And this person was thinking that MedBridge would cover all the CEU requirements that they needed for the states, but they're having trouble determining if they actually are fitting the specific requirements for some of the states. Because, for example, one of the states, North Carolina, says you can only have a certain number of electronic CEUs and the other ones need to be from other categories. Could you advise whether or not MedBridge would cover all the requirements? Because if not, I'm going to have to be really scrambling to get some other ones done.
Yeah, so MedBridge, they have their whole catalog of normal courses that you can take that have, which on here would qualify as electronic CEUs. But they also have periodic CEU courses that are live. So you have to tune in at a specific time and you can ask questions live and just like this. And those count as in-person CEUs for most states. For North Carolina, I'm pretty sure that was the case. We've renewed our North Carolina licenses in the past, and we used live MedBridge courses to count for that. So the only issue is that depending on the month, depending on the availability of those live courses, you may or may not have time to get that done. So if you're going to count on these live courses for MedBridge or any other online CEU provider to get those in-person CEUs, because they consider live as in-person, make sure you do it ahead of time because it might only be 1 course per month and it has to be during a time when you can take it. And sometimes it's during work hours. So we have used that in the past. Those count as in-person CEUs, but just make sure that you give yourself enough time to sign up for them and actually be able to take those courses because if it's during work hours or something, it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, so they call them live webinars, and in recent years they've had a lot more frequent. So I think now since it's only October, hopefully if this renewal is like the end of the year, a lot of them are like December 31st. Hopefully in the next 2 months you'll have time to get in for some of those live webinars to get some of your live requirements. But again, every state is different, so some of them have like different categories. The thing I really like about MedBridge is you can sort by the state and the license. So you can enter your license and sort the courses by which ones count for which categories. Like some states will say like category A, category B, like they'll define them differently.
Or type 1, type 2.
Type 1, type 2, whatever. And so sort the courses and look at them and see specifically what does it say for that state and what category. A loophole that I've often found too is sometimes they want you to have like a certain number that are from the top tier category, like live, or evidence-based or whatever. But then sometimes they'll have pre-recorded, you can have a certain number amount, and then they'll have this like lower tier category that just kind of says like other, and then sometimes you can just like toss in some like other ones that are basically also pre-recorded. So use those categories to your advantage, but yeah, definitely read the fine print because every state is different.
Yep. Okay, the next question is about taxes and accountants. How do you find a tax pro or accountant that caters to travel therapists? What qualifications do we have to look for? Who do you recommend? So it depends on if you want someone in person or you want somebody online. Most people don't care either way. If you want to find an online accountant that is proficient with travel taxes, then obviously it's going to be a lot easier than finding somebody in person that understands the ins and outs of travel therapy. With that being said, for the most part, if you don't have a complicated return, travel taxes are not that difficult. So most accountants will be able to handle it. But if you have a lot of questions, or you have, about tax homes, or you have things that you're uncertain about in terms of whether or not you're eligible for stipends, those are the types of situations that you would want to use someone that is very proficient in travel taxes, because there's a lot of intricacies that some accountants might not know about. So in that case, there's several options online. We have one that we've worked with quite a bit recently that we could recommend to you, but there's several options.
Yep. So as Jared mentioned, we personally have done our own taxes in the past. We've used a local accountant in the past. We've also talked to an online accountant who works with travelers specifically. We've done kind of all varieties over the years. The only tricky part about the actual filing of taxes as a traveler is the multiple states. Other than that, you just kind of put down what's on your W-2. So most accountants should be able to handle multiple states, but again, if it makes you feel better to go through someone, we can recommend Nermina at Choice One is the accountant that we have recommended here recently for travelers. So send us a message if you want to get her information and work with her.
Yep. Okay, here's the tax home question. Again, we're not qualified accountants, so if you really have specific questions about your own tax home situation, just talk to an accountant and get legit professional advice. But we'll give you what we've heard and what we know, but definitely don't take this as gospel. If we have a house that we rent out while we're working, but still come back and spend a month in the area during downtime from work, is that still technically okay, or do we physically have to live in the residence those 30 days? So I think this question is about whether or not you can rent out your house while you're away. And so it's complicated. It's a little complicated. You cannot rent out your entire residence for an entire year while you're gone. So say you want to go to California, you're going to stay there a whole year, and you think, okay, well, I'll rent out my tax home for that year while I'm gone, and it'll work great because then I'll make money. I'll still have this tax home. Based on the accountants that we've talked to, you cannot rent out the whole residence for the whole year, because obviously then you do not have that residence to go back to. The whole point of a tax home is that you have somewhere that you can go back to between assignments, or if you need to, or say a contract's canceled, you can go back there. You have ties to that area, that kind of thing. So you can't rent your whole house for the whole year. You can rent your whole house minus one bedroom, though, for the whole year. So say you have a 4-bedroom house and you want to rent all but one bedroom of that, with the understanding that that one bedroom is for you, and you might come back there throughout the year. You need to spend 30 days at your tax home anyway, so that bedroom is yours for when you're in town. If you do that with the understanding with the renters that that's how the situation is going to work, then that's fine. But that bedroom has to be reserved for you, locked, your stuff in it, that kind of stuff. You can rent your house out fully, but it can't be for the full year. So say you do an Airbnb situation, or you Airbnb it 3 months at a time to other travelers, but then for 1 month a year, you come back home and you use the whole house. You can do that. But you just can't rent the whole house for the whole year, or basically you just can't rent the whole house for the whole year. You can rent the whole house for part of the year, or you can rent part of the house for the whole year, but not the whole house for the whole year.
But again, when it comes to specific tax home questions, we highly recommend that you get in touch with a tax advisor who works with travelers. Again, the one that we recommend is Nermina at Choice One. She does a tax home consult. It's like $50. You set up a call with her. She'll answer all your questions in detail. You can tell her the nuances of all your different situations. Like the next question too, about staying in an area for a while, that goes back to more tax home questions. These are best discussed with a CPA who understands taxes. We can kind of give you the general guidelines, but it's best to just pay $50, get the peace of mind, get the advice from the tax professional. All right, so the next question is, how long can you stay in one area? Do you know, what are the rules on how long you can stay at a facility? I'm coming up on a year. My recruiter told me I have to take a 30-day break once I hit a year before I could come back to the same facility. But I've also heard some people say you can only stay in a location 12 months period out of any 24-month period. Does that mean I need to travel out of the state so I'm not considered a permanent resident?
Yes. So the recruiters never really have a great understanding of tax homes, taxes in general. So don't ever take advice from them. Make sure you're taking advice from an accountant for anything that's important, because the recruiter is not going to be held accountable if you ever get audited and there's any issues. So yes, you cannot stay in an area. Taking a 30-day break does not reset the clock, so to speak. You need to leave the area for at least a year if you've been there a year. So 12 months in any 24-month period is the rule of thumb. I think there was a court case that established that as being long enough. If you work for a year in one place and you go away for a year and you come back, then that counts as that not being your permanent residence. But if you're working in the same area for 14, 15, 16 months, then yes, that will definitely, that area is now your tax home because you've earned all of your income there for over a year. So, so that's part of it. The other thing is, does this mean I have to travel out of state so I'm not considered permanent resident? It doesn't mean that you have to travel out of state. It just means that you can't be in that same metro area. So for example, say you work for a year in Sacramento, you could go to the Bay Area and work there for 3 more months or 6 more months. That wouldn't be an issue at all. You can stay in the same state, it just can't be in the same area.
Yep. All right, the next question is how about arranging your travel contracts throughout the year. This particular person had a circumstance where they were like, I need to be home, these 3 or 4 months per year. Could I arrange travel contracts throughout the other parts of the year and then just take like a 3 or 4 month gap and go home? Absolutely. You can arrange your lifestyle and your schedule throughout the year however you would like to as a travel therapist. We have done this over the last several years where we only basically work like 3 or 6 months a year, usually just like 1 contract a year, and the rest of the year we travel for fun, we go back home, whatever. So you can absolutely arrange your lifestyle throughout the year however you would like to. You don't have any obligation beyond the length of 1 contract. So just signing a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract, you're only committed for that period. You can do whatever you want the rest of the year if you can make it work financially.
Yep. Next question was about resumes. Do you have any recommendations for formatting a resume as a travel therapist without being too many pages long?
Yeah, so this is definitely something we've run into over the years. So over the years, basically what we started doing was getting rid of stuff that was more like fluff. So back in the beginning when we were new grads, we still had a lot of like our accolades and achievements and extracurriculars and those kind of things.
Obviously when we first started, we still had clinicals on there.
Yeah, we had clinicals, we had, awards that we'd won or research projects we've been involved in, all this kind of stuff. So over the years, we just kind of started like deleting some of that fluff stuff that the employers don't necessarily care about. Like, yes,
especially travel employers.
Especially travel employers. Like now later when you're applying for a regular job, they may want more of like a long CV where they want to know about your accolades and your research projects and your all these other things. But for the travel jobs, it's like you probably don't need to have your clinicals on there anymore. You probably don't need to have your extracurriculars on there anymore. So start deleting the fluff to make more room for more jobs. We have always done each individual job, each individual travel contract as like a 2-liner. So we'll just put, like the basics. Obviously you want the location, the setting, the time frame, and then just a brief description. So we try to keep it as a 2-liner in reverse order. Definitely the things that they're going to care the most about are, right at the top, we put our education, our licensure, and then our jobs. And we've been able to, now granted, we didn't travel full-time for 9 years, so we don't have 9 years of back-to-back-to-back travel contracts, but we've got 9 years of jobs on there, and ours are 2 pages.
Yep.
So it's doable. The other thing to keep in mind about resumes is quite often when you submit your resume to the recruiter, they deconstruct it and build it into this profile that's submitted to the facility. Quite often they don't actually even see your actual resume, with the exception of if it's a direct client, like especially if it's like a direct outpatient client, they may just actually forward your actual resume in an email to them. But a lot of times if you go through like the VMS and it's a big hospital system, they don't ever actually even see the pretty little document that you typed up. Yeah. So I honestly don't worry too much about how pretty it is or what it looks like. Just get the essentials on there, try to keep it brief.
Ours is extremely basic and we have never had any questions or issues at all in all the jobs we've applied for. So don't worry if you think like, oh, this is bare minimum. That's all most jobs care about anyway, especially in the travel world.
Yep. All right, so we have 2 more questions here, and then we'll see if we have a few minutes to go over a few that are in the comments.
All right, student loans. This is a good question. Hopefully Nick's still in here. I'm interested if you are switching to income-driven repayment plans for student loans. Have you applied for those already? If your overall strategy has changed with the new injunction? Also, if you and Jared are aware of any assumed timelines for the case, timelines for changes with servicers, how to find that out, potential changes with whoever becomes president, just in general interested in talking shop about student loans. Very good question. So I haven't written a lot about student loans. It's been a year now since I last wrote about it. A lot of you guys that have been following us for a long time, I used to write about student loans all the time. I think I have probably 10 articles on student loans at this point, looking at the different plans and different ways to go about whether or not to pay off your loans quickly, or to go on income-driven repayment plans, make minimum payments, all that. So I haven't written a lot since the SAVE plan was enacted. And before that, I hadn't written a lot for quite a while because there's just been so much uncertainty with student loans since COVID. And for 2.5 years, 3 years, student loans were completely paused. So I was like, well, what's the point of doing anything until these loans are unpaused? What's the point of even thinking about this? So then when SAVE came up and passed, I was like, okay, great, I'll write about that, I'll compare. SAVE looks like the best plan for most people. This is a lot easier now. Well, now SAVE looks like it's probably going to be gone. And again, we're in a situation where everything's in limbo. I don't know anything except what's publicly available about changes for SAVE. It looks like it's probably going to go away, but in terms of what's going to happen, no one knows yet. And it could be a situation where they just take parts of it away. It could be, it was obviously extremely generous. I mean, I think for travelers, it was like insanely generous plan where you basically don't have any interest accumulate and make no payments the whole time you're traveling, and you just don't have to worry about your student loans. I thought it was a little bit crazy to start with, so I'm not really that surprised it's being challenged. But it could be a situation where they just take away, maybe they take away the interest subsidy. So now interest does accumulate, or maybe they go back to how repay was, where it's only a half interest subsidy. So everything right now is just speculation. There's really not a lot of point in spending too much time on it, trying to understand what's going to happen, because I don't think everything right now is just a guess. If you go to all these student loan expert pages, you get all kinds of different opinions, but they're all just guessing, just speculating. So I wouldn't spend too much time on it right now. Just wait. Right now things are in forbearance. Just wait and see what happens. Wait until there's more definite advice, because the thing too is if they get rid of SAVE, they might also get rid of pay as you earn, which would put us in a really weird situation where now some people might be on IBR or some older plans, or maybe then it makes sense to go on the 10-year repayment. But as soon as there's any clarity, I'll assess and try to write an article explaining the differences and trying to determine what's best for travelers. But right now, there's really no reason in doing that because it can completely change in just a few months.
Yep. So keep an eye out for whenever that does happen.
And in terms of potential changes, whoever becomes president, I don't think it really is going to matter that much. I think most of what's going to happen now, if this gets blocked, is that everything's going to have to go through Congress. So it was kind of crazy, all the executive actions or executive orders that were being passed during the COVID times, because things were just crazy then. But I don't think that's going to be the case going forward. Since a lot of these executive orders have been challenged, they're being overruled by courts. I think now it's going to be, the old process where things take a long time. They go through Congress, they pass slowly. So I don't really think who president is going to have a major impact. So, I wouldn't let student loans influence my decision. Obviously, the Democratic Party talks a lot more about student loan forgiveness than the Republican Party does, but that doesn't mean they're actually going to make anything happen when the time comes. Actions speak louder than words, and a lot of times politicians promise things that they never deliver. So.
Yeah. So speaking of who's going to become president, the last question, we've gotten a few questions recently about voting as a traveler. Specifically, how do you go about voting if you're in a different state? So actually, we have just done our absentee ballots because we are home. However, our baby is due October 31st, and a lot of times first-time babies come late, and so we don't know if we're going to be able to make it to the polls on election day. So we were like, let's just get our absentee ballots and just get it over with in advance so that we don't have to worry about that. So for the most part, it's recommended if you're out of state, if you're a traveler, go ahead and try to register in your home state. Go online, and it was really easy to find online where to register and request an absentee ballot. Just make sure that you don't change your permanent address on there. You still want your permanent address on your voter registration to be your home state. It has to be your home state, but there should be an option to ask where you would like to have it mailed, and I think that address can be different. You could check some kind of box that says send it to this address, but again, I'm not changing my permanent address. We did get somebody that asked about could you vote in the state where you're temporarily living. We don't know a lot about that. I know that when I was in college, I did vote in, they set it up locally for you to be able to vote, and so I don't remember whether I was voting for that state, I was out of state, or for my home state. Again, if you're not sure, you could always first call your home state voter registration office or call the local voter registration offices, and hopefully they can help you with that.
You have to remember too that states vary a lot depending on what proof of ID verification, that kind of stuff that they need. So most cases it's way easier, makes way more sense to just vote absentee in your home state. But if for some reason you can't do that, then definitely contact whoever's in charge of voting in the area that you're at and ask them if there's a way that you can vote in the jurisdiction that you're currently at instead of your home.
Yeah, and so hopefully you still have a few weeks to get that sorted out. When we went online and requested our absentee ballots, they came within just a couple of days. So hopefully you'll have time to get that all sorted out. All right, so that's all the questions that we had. We have a few minutes. We can go over a few questions from the chat.
All right, I saw this one on Instagram. I think it's the only one. Yeah, if you guys have any other questions too, go ahead and leave those now. Can you talk about productivity expectations for new grads within different fields, outpatient, skilled nursing, and home health, plus paperwork time expected? That might help them to make a decision to choose their field. So travel jobs vary drastically. I mean, we've seen everything from outpatient one-on-one with time for documentation, where you're seeing 7 patients per day, to outpatient contracts that you might have 30 scheduled. So it can be everywhere in between. I would say most jobs are somewhere between 8 to 12 patients for outpatient expected per day, but yeah, it can vary wildly. We've worked some contracts where I was all one-on-one, and we've worked some that I saw 18 patients in a day. So it depends on the specific job for any productivity based issues, and that's why the interview is extremely important. Same for skilled nursing. We've seen some skilled nursing jobs where 80% productivity is fine, and we've seen some where they want 97 or 100% for PTAs and codas. So it varies drastically, and in terms of home health, that one varies even more because some productivity is based on visits, some based on the visit type, some are based on units you charge, some are based just on time you're with patients. Every contract's different there, and the number of points or whatever you get for visits can also vary just depending on which contract you take. We've seen expectations of 8 patients per day in home health, which is insane, and we've seen some that expect 4 patients per day. So it varies massively. Really important to interview and ask those questions. In terms of determining which field to work in or which specialty to choose, I think that has a lot more to do with what you're interested in than productivity or anything like that, because there's going to be good and bad jobs in every setting.
Yep. All right, Madison wanted to know, do you guys have any experience or advice with taking contracts with the same nationwide PT company at different locations? We're currently on a 6-month contract with a company. They seem to have a lot of jobs closer to home that we're thinking about taking. Would this maybe make the transition to those jobs a little easier? Yeah, we do have experience with this actually. We've taken the majority of our jobs over the years in outpatient. We have worked in other settings, but because quite often we wanted to come back closer to home or like in the same region, we took a lot of our jobs in Virginia and North Carolina. We ended up working for the same like PT outpatient chain at several different locations. It wasn't always by choice, it just kind of sometimes worked out because they had a lot of jobs in the region that we wanted to be in, even though some of those jobs were 5 or 8 hours apart. But yeah, we did work at the same company several different times. In fact, we even ended up during COVID being connected with the regional manager because we had taken a contract there, then found out that they could use us in our hometown at their location there, PRN, and that worked out really well to have that connection. So yeah, absolutely, Madison, like if you've had a good experience with that company and you kind of get connected with them, that could be really a good situation for you, because quite often maybe they'll use the same EMR, or they might do things similar, and maybe you build a connection with like a regional manager, and that could look good on your resume because they're like, oh, we can see that you've worked here before at one of our other locations, and that might help you get the job easier. So definitely, if you've had a good experience with them, that can be a great route to go.
Yep. Another Instagram question, have you guys noticed if most agencies prorate stipends if you don't get 40 hours? And have you guys run into the issue where contract says 40 hours guaranteed, but the actual facilities said they don't guarantee hours? Most companies will prorate stipends. I would say we only know, I think, of 1 or maybe 2 companies that don't prorate stipends if you don't work those hours. So for those of you that aren't familiar, let's say you have a contract where your stipends are based on 40 hours, but they don't have a full caseload, and say you work 36 hours. In most cases, they'll prorate the hourly rate, obviously, because you're not working the full 40 hours, but they'll also prorate your stipends based on the hours worked. The reason for that is, even though this is supposed to be for living expenses, the travel world has kind of morphed over time, where the expenses or the reimbursements you get for meals, housing, incidentals has increased significantly, and the hourly rates have decreased significantly. Travel companies and travelers over time have tried to skirt the line more and more and more on what's a reimbursement and what a normal hourly rate would be. And since they've done that, now the travel companies don't have the money in their margins to be able to pay out stipends if travelers don't work the full hours, because they don't get paid by the facility if the traveler doesn't work the hours either. So in most cases, they will prorate stipends. The companies that don't prorate stipends, you just have to remember that, yes, it's great when that happens, because it's like, oh, wow, I'm not working all these hours, but I'm still getting most of my paycheck. But in order for them to do that, they have to account for that somehow. And just kind of like I mentioned earlier about, what was that question about, bonuses? Or
Reimbursements, how they structure the reimbursements.
Reimbursements, whether or not they give them to you up front or they handle on the back end. It's the same kind of thing. So any company that will pay you for stipends for hours you didn't work, they have to keep a bucket of money set aside for those instances, which means that maybe they keep 1 or 2% of every bill rate from every person aside in a pot of money that they're able to pay out later if you don't work your full hours. So your pay, everything else being equal, is going to be less with a company that does guarantee stipends than a company that doesn't, because they have to account for that on the front end. So there's no free money in travel therapy. There's no free money in any job, but travel therapy is even more transparent. So there's no right or wrong way to do it, but most companies will not pay you for any hours you don't work for stipends for those hours.
All right, guys, I think that is all the questions that we got. So hopefully this was helpful, especially for our course group members, where we were able to spend some more time going into detail about some of these scenarios. And then for some of you also that had submitted questions to us via our DMs and during the live stream. But again, if you are interested in learning more about any of these individual topics, definitely go back and listen to some of our old podcasts, our old YouTube videos, where we may have spent a whole hour talking about each one of these individual topics, especially things like the tax homes and that kind of thing. Also, if you visit our website at traveltherapymentor.com, we've got detailed articles on lots of these different topics. Feel free to send us a message if you have tax home questions and you want to get connected with our recommended tax CPA. Never too early to start thinking about that, because tax season will be just around the corner after the new year. Again, about CEUs, if you guys are still looking for CEUs for the end of the year, right now we're running a special with MedBridge until tomorrow, Monday, October the 14th. If you sign up for your MedBridge subscription using our discount code TTM, you'll get 40% off, which is like the regular standard deal that we offer year round. But you'll also get entered to win an additional 12 months. Next week, they're going to draw the winner. MedBridge will draw it randomly, and they'll pick one winner, and they'll notify you that you got an additional 12 months for free. So that's a really good thing to take advantage of now. We actually still have, I think, a little bit of CEUs to get done for our Virginia licenses.
Yes, we do.
We may have had them all done because it's a 2-year period. Because last year we had TravCon CEUs, which was really helpful. This year, unfortunately, we didn't get to go to TravCon, so we don't have those CEUs this year. But yeah, we also have to get our CEUs done and get our licenses renewed this year as well. So I think that's everything. So as we mentioned, the baby is due in less than 3 weeks. So if we can, we'll try to get another video podcast up before then, but we'll just see. We're kind of on baby watch now. We're settled in at home here in Virginia and waiting for her to arrive.
Could be here at any time. Exciting.
Yeah. So we're getting very excited. So, keep an eye out on Instagram. We'll try to still be kind of fairly active on there and let you guys know when the baby comes.
Yep.
But feel free to send us a message if you have any more questions. Be happy to help you guys out.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Have a good night.
Bye.